the next session, I think, is one of the most vital. It's the enterprise value shift. How do we think very differently about reframing the customer experience, marketing, and brand? And then a sort of addendum to that line, which is as financial assets. I think we hear a lot around the conversations here about how do we ensure that what we do. I think Zena made a very interesting point from Sephora just in that last bit of the session with Ruth. In the end, we are selling real things to real people. That's what we do. And it's important to remember that every day in a technological world. Thank you very much to EY Studio Plus for supporting us here. It's great to have you as partners. It's great to see the content we create together, Karen and Lawrence, around this whole idea around enterprise value, which is different from vertical value within the silos that some of us work in. Karen from EY Studio on the far right, welcome. And then next to her, Rachel, CMO of Adobe Enterprise, and then Lawrence Buchanan from EY Studio Plus, welcome, and Rebecca Kent, Head of Global Experience at Warner Bros. Discovery. Now, I shared with Rebecca, before we came onto stage, that classic bit of anecdata, which is not real data, but also maybe slightly tells us something. I traveled many years ago to Florida with two young Harry Potter fans that also happened to be my children. I didn't just steal them off the street. And we went with a degree of trepidation to Harry Potter World in Florida, one of Warner Bros's most seminal brands, I would say. And I went in nervous as a parent because I thought the last thing I want, after spending not a small amount of money to get over there with my family, was a disappointing experience. And luckily, I can report 10 years on to the boss that it was brilliant. And that really matters. Because when we talk about experiences and authenticity, which Stad guys just said is a word we should ban, maybe we should, I don't know. It really matters that the thing you're saying you're offering is actually the thing you are offering. But Rebecca, maybe I could start with you around in-person. Huge amount of talk here about artificial intelligence, synthetics, fantastic opportunities. You know, asking if you're pro or against AI, sort of asking whether you're pro or against fire. Well, it depends what you use it for. But I do want to talk about human-made and personal experiences. Just in your business, talk us through how you are thinking about enterprise value, in-person experiences connected to digital relationships that may well not be in person.
Yeah, there's definitely a trend for people seeking in-person experiences. And if you think about our younger generations, they've been brought up digital first, or Gen Alpha are actually AI first, which is kind of scary. So what is different to them? What is unique? What is something they want to spend their money on? What do they want to experience with other people? It's in-person experiences. So we're seeing a huge growth in this area. And interesting what you said about your family. They're looking for really quality in-person experiences. If they're going to spend their time, if they're going to spend their money, if they're going to bring along friends or family, then it has to be an incredible experience. The bar is very, very high. But if you can deliver that experience, then they are absolutely going to be there. What we're also finding is that the experience doesn't end when you walk out. So the experience actually starts beforehand. How are we marketing to them? How are we selling the tickets to them? How are we getting them prepared to go to the experience? Then after the experience, it's how do we follow up? Is there anything they can take away from that? How do they engage with that brand and that experience further once they've left the experience?
Lawrence, could I come to you? You made a really interesting point and have made it before around the multilingual CMO, which I really liked. This idea that the talents needed at the CMO level are broader now than maybe they would have been expected to be 10 years ago. Though, of course, many CMOs did have very broad talents. Now, as a CMO, you need to be expert in the enterprise value of your business, which is the whole suite of operations. So that's working closely with CTO, working closely with the CFO so that they understand the return to the bottom line of what it is you're trying to do. Of course, the CMO function itself is deeply skilled as a function, creativity, customer acquisition, brand, storytelling, etc. How is the job changing in this world where we need to always consider ultimately that we are selling real things to real people?
I think the role of the CMO is incredibly challenged right now. If you take out energy and AI from the S&P 500, then it's in the red in 2026. So by definition, most companies are struggling with the growth agenda at the moment. They're under some degree of pressure. Now, if you look at that from the perspective of the broader C-suite, the CFO, for example, many organizations for the last couple of years at least have focused on a cost-cutting agenda. AI comes along at that exact moment, and it's almost like the perfect silver bullet that we can fire. And marketing is in the crosshairs because a typical consumer organization might spend between 7 and 12% of total revenue on marketing. It's a huge cost line item. So isn't it tempting to say, why don't we point AI at that and take cost out? Isn't that a tempting pot of money to grab? I think that's incredibly dangerous. In my mind, the CMO needs to be elevated in the organization because companies need to differentiate on experience. Price will become commoditized. We've lost control of half of the customer journey because it's happening inside LLMs. So experience is the thing that differentiates. And the CMO elevated across the organization is perfectly placed to orchestrate that. Now, the challenge is we've spent the last 20 years telling CMOs they need to speak two languages, creativity and technology, and that's it. It's no longer enough. By multilingual, the CMO needs to speak finance to talk about the business outcomes of their investments. They need to speak supply chain to talk about the delivery of experiences. They need to speak, unfortunately, risk and regulatory compliance if they're a global brand, because it's different in every single geography. So the CMO needs to be multilingual to be elevated to that orchestrator role.
Rachel, you were nodding enthusiastically, smiling
Yes.
in maybe a degree of knowledge of the challenges that are ahead. I think I've been challenged, and I think quite rightly, that highly skilled CMOs have always been multilingual. I think that's a genuine challenge back to this idea of broadness. I think that's a good place to start. But when you think about your CFO and your CEO, and maybe the board is looking at those line items, it is often the marketing line that is kind of, well, it's not noticeable immediately. We're not stopping sort of making a product that suddenly doesn't happen. We're not stopping the factories for a day. It's something that you sort of die slowly by killing marketing. You don't notice the drip away of negativity that you get from it. How do you handle those kind of conversations at a C-suite level to ensure that the businesses you work with and actually your own business are really focused on this is an ROI issue?
I do think it's speaking the language of the CFO, speaking the language of the CRO, being able as a market, as a CMO to say, not only are we ensuring that there's brand health, brand integrity, that our brand is not only showing up at the demand creation level, so how are we continuing to bring in new customers? How are we continuing to acquire, which leads to new revenue, stronger revenue? But how are we doing that in a way for your CFO that shows results? And I think most CMOs, know this. It's always easy to say, okay, no more marketing. But I think what marketers are looking at now and facing now is how do you become, not only literate in supply chain or sales, but numerate in the conversations with your CFO about this is why investment in brand matters. Because if you're doing demand creation, if you're doing, brand awareness, that's creating demand, and that scale and that creation of that demand just means that everything else you're doing farther down the funnel is going to be optimized. It's going to perform better because you're no longer going to the exact same customers. You're acquiring, you're sharing, you're, engaging brand new customers. And that obviously equates to bottom line, increase in revenue, increase in business value.
Rachel, how does it change the arguments or the way you look at these things if you're a B2C business, a big B2C business, which we've heard, a lot about how you connect with consumers. What about you're a B2B service? You're a supporting enterprise service. How do you have to change your arguments about acquisition and why storytelling, brand, systematic approaches still really matter? I was with the head of marketing for the business section, the business part of Spotify, and she was very interesting on they're often the slight Cinderella within their own organization because they're not the consumer facing side, which people can say, oh, there's a beautiful advert that's created XYZ or whatever it might be, or the campaign. B2B, slightly harder.
I think it's similar opportunities and similar challenges. I think it's potentially a different language, but there's still at the core of it, you're still doing similar motions. You're still building amazing customer experiences that engage customers, whether they're current customers or new, right? Even if you're B2B, you're constantly thinking, what is my customer experience that gets me new customers? How do I basically turn the customers I have into loyal fans? How do I turn those loyal customers into advocates for my brand, into evangelists for my brand? And that's true whether you're talking about B2C and consumers or you're talking about B2B and those customers. Everybody wants to make sure in both areas, am I acquiring new customers? Am I retaining those customers? Are they not just customers? Are they fans? Are they evangelists for what we're delivering?
Karen, let me come to you. A great piece of work that we did together had this fabulous line in it. I was just doing my research yesterday into our work together. Implementation is more difficult than experimentation. You can experiment forever. And there's this shocking statistic, which I use quite a lot and I've used on the stage here. 88% of companies are actively experimenting with AI. 81% are saying there is no bottom line meaningful impact. The delta between cost and ROI is growing, and a lot of leaderships are looking at that and saying, how long are we supposed to wear this tokenization, implementation costs, experimentation costs? Hey, kids, just go out and sandbox this for whatever. Run that thing overnight. There's another 100 tokens I've just spent with I didn't know I was going to spend, whatever it might be. How do you move on from that model to something that is really bottom line?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're right to experiment, and we've been experimenting for a while. And I think we always talk to businesses about like experiment and innovate. But I think we are at this kind of crossroads at the moment. And I think Lawrence said this before about AI came along, at least for marketing, at a very cost-focused moment. And I think a lot of the application of it has been coming in, cut stuff out, save cost, and suddenly everything else will work. But I like to come back to what I think is a really strong red thread that we need a bit more in that we need to view things like brand, marketing, customer experience as financial assets. Over the last 30 years, businesses and what they're valued on has changed massively from tangibles to intangibles. So away from factories and footprint into customer relationships, brand and marketing. And a huge part of that intangible value is brand and its customer experience. And I think unless you're looking at AI with how it's growing the value of those assets and how it's increasing them, and I think the AI it's kind of leveled a bit of an operational kind of floor, but actually it's increased the need for more governance and trust around how you actually make the intangible thing grow. So I do think we need to not be looking at an AI strategy. You need to be looking at a holistic strategy for your entire enterprise and how really being sure of the role that brand plays in it and marketing plays, and then looking more at how AI is a part of that rather than the panacea that maybe it's becoming in certain places. And I'm talking from a point of view of I was a machine learning coder, right? I built AI 20 years ago, one part of it. I'm a huge advocate of it, but I think we need to make sure that we're looking very much from a business outcome lens on it and not from a cost.
I love the fact you have a sort of proper substantial background, because we've suddenly started talking about AI as if it came out of a box newly formed with this thing called ChatGPT. But of course, machine learning, statistical, opportunity at scale is not a new thing. You've been working in these fields for decades around statistical probability at scale, which is large language models. How did it change when it became a consumer brand? AI itself, suddenly we could use it, all of us, not just the people who were expert in it. And how did that change the way you had to think about the AI conversations within businesses? Because suddenly everyone's an expert because they all use Claude or ChatGPT or Perplexity or whatever it might be.
I mean, I used it years ago in the Human Genome Project, which my job hasn't changed because it's pattern recognition, and actually so much about brand and customer experience is pattern recognition, it's correlations, it's understanding how they come together. I think what's really flown is it's a bit like when your CEO sees your ad and they're really excited by the advertising. If they can start, if they're experimenting on ChatGPT, everyone can do it now. And I think it's leveled the playing field, particularly with people who need to make their own content. But I think what it means is that we need to be very clear about what those things like the content and the marketing need to do, because I think we've maybe lost a little bit of like, what's this actually in pursuit of, rather than just doing it. So I think everyone experimenting has been great, but I still think you need real experts and CMOs to help ensure that why you're doing that is really driving the wider enterprise value.
Rebecca, can I ask you about how these conversations that now need to be much more horizontal between the different departments, how do you value and make sure that C-suite audiences understand, which is, a large part of who Fortune speaks to every day? How do you value customer experience? Because a lot of it is emotion. It's a response to a feeling that something gives you, an experience gives you, particularly when it's human to human. How do you speak to your colleagues at your level? You were nodding vigorously when sometimes the marketing line seems to be, well, that's the easy one. It's not the factory bit. How do you respond to that with the right type of language that has those proof points?
Yeah, I think at Warner Brothers Discovery, we do a lot of different things, right? So we do everything from film to television to in-person experiences to news to animation to sports. And so that's a lot of customer touch points. And that's a lot of opportunities for us to hit customers across different parts of our enterprise, and then hopefully move people around that enterprise. So that's how I speak to them, is about that there is value in all of us looking at this, and of us looking at this holistically, because someone might be a sports fan and a Harry Potter fan. And wouldn't that be great if we can find that intersection and be marketing Harry Potter to them while they're watching an NBA game, as an example? And so what that requires, though, is actually us working together and making sure we have the right data and AI tools that go across. And that's actually been quite challenging, because people do like to think in their silos, but the real value and the real unlock there for AI, and hopefully for ROI and everything you've been talking about, is actually being able to look across the entire company value chain. And that's a very different way of thinking, actually.
AI is an operational layer rather than a way of reading a PDF 4.5% more quickly. How have you seen AI transforming your business? How are you using AI in a way that is, we are in this fulcrum moment, aren't we, where the next stage is AI has left the chat. It's actually in your business. Agentic AI will be an operational layer that you won't actually see day to day. It'll just be there operating to support your business. How is that changing how you think about how you need to operate sort of horizontally rather than vertically? Because those silos are often stuck with different data groups which don't speak to each other, different language, not just human language, but actually different literal language of your different groups of data and how it's kept, unstructured data in particular. How are you slowly building an enterprise model that really leads to growth rather than just productivity gains?
Yeah, in order to do that, we talk about things that what are the AI opportunities at that enterprise level. So there might be a great experiment that someone's doing in the sports vertical that's cute, And sure, we could do that, but the ROI is never really going to be there on that little experiment. But if we can find those AI opportunities that go across the enterprise, that's where the real unlock happens. And a lot of that comes through some really basic, boring stuff. Like, let's make sure our data is all structured in the right way. Let's make sure our different editing tools, every different silo uses a different editing tool. Let's try and connect our editing tools in ways so that we can get value. So it's funny, a lot of AI sounds really sexy and we'll have these agentic tools. Actually, it just comes down to some real basics about getting kind of data and tooling and workflows working correctly. And then we can kind of have the right to do that more sexy stuff. And I heard you earlier on the ROI piece. I think the unlock will be there, but we have to build the tools. So, if we're spending money cleaning up our data, we're spending money retooling, we're spending money on workflows, naturally there's not the kind of ROI right now, but we need to do that in order to get the ROI in the future.
Absolutely. Lawrence, could I come to you? But I'd love to come to all of us in here for some questions. So have a little think next about a question. But Lawrence, how do you think about, working with so many clients who have these challenges? How long do we have to be patient for the unlock to unlock? And I can see a crunch point coming where a lot of businesses are going to start saying, hang on, enough already. And also looking at the price points there.
Yeah, I think there's no question there's a crunch point coming to token costs is suddenly starting to hit the headlines in a big way. In my mind, we are 1 mile into a marathon at the moment, despite the huge changes we've seen, despite the fact AI has been here for, decades. We're only just beginning. And typically in the history of any new technology, at first people bolted on to the way they used to work yesterday. And so it becomes another complexity, another layer, but we don't actually reimagine the process, the operating model, the way that work gets done. I think where we're heading towards, and people that are unlocking value are reimagining the operating model, the ways of working, the technology architecture to completely change the business with AI at the heart of it, and of course human creativity around it. The final thing I'd say is, despite all the exciting technology changes, my views were also at the start of a trend which is just back to basics. And I've worked in this market for over 25 years now. The first sort of textbooks I read were things like One-to-One Marketing by Don Peppers and Martha Rogers. Those books talked about fundamentally, it's better to keep an existing customer than to acquire a new one. It costs 6 times as much to acquire a new one than to an existing one. To me, there are absolute basics. What's our cost of customer acquisition? What is customer lifetime value? What are the levers that we can pull to influence customer lifetime value? Those are really important questions. And if we find ourselves spending way more on token consumption than the actual lifetime value of a customer, that's a real issue. It's not an AI issue, it's a common sense issue at this stage. So those back to basics, how will we compete? Do we understand the economics of customer loyalty? I think that's part of the unlock to drive ROI.
Rachel, I love you laughing at this idea of, I do think there's something in the back to basics thing. I remember being taught when I was a very young journalist, make sure at the end of every paragraph, there's a reason for your reader to read the next one. Literally, that's journalism 101. And sometimes we have all these highfalutin models of how we're going to do, of course, written, audio, video, everything we need to do. But there's the basic point of journalism, which is, will the reader be delighted enough by the previous paragraph to read the next one? Just give us a response to what Lawrence said, then questions. Hands up, people who would like to ask something incredibly thoughtful. But Rachel, give us a thought on that.
I do think that it is, not so much rethinking, but to your point, back to basics, like starting with your customer and working backwards. Like, who are your customers? Whether they're your current customers, ones you want to acquire, do you understand what your value is to them? How are you going to help them drive value? And I think that the more marketers are focused on that, understand that, and then work backwards from the customer, the better off, like, all of your marketing, all of your customer experiences. But I also think that it's AI so much a bolt-on, but what you said about data is true. It's like the unsexy part, but if you do not get it right, if you do not get that data foundation right, then everything built on top of it is sub-optimized, right? So it's like, I want to have all these great agentic solutions, but they're built on a not very strong data foundation. okay, so they're not going to work as well. And later you're going to wonder why didn't I get everything I was promised on this solution? Well, you didn't start from the fundamentals, which is, do you have your data? Do you have the foundation? Is it integrated? Do you have the sources? That's what your AI builds on and trains on. And if it's not good, nothing that comes after will be good.
And I would also put, Rachel, something else into the non-sexy bucket, which shouldn't be there, is this idea of compliance, risk, IP control.
Yes.
That is absolutely vital to the next models that we'll all be using.
100%.
Can I?
Rebecca, yeah, Lawrence,
one,
yeah.
one more point. It's okay.
Yeah.
So Warner Brothers Discovery is kind of fortunate because they have incredible creativity and experiences and IP and content people want to engage with. It's huge chunks of the market that don't have that. If you have a commoditized product or service, say a telco, power and utilities, they're not things that consumers naturally want to engage with. I think there's something that's really quite serious there, which is more and more we're losing control of the customer journey to AI. You can absolutely conceive a world where, as a consumer, I outsource the management of those contracts to AI, and I say to an AI, you just go ahead and manage my telco, my broadband, my energy. I don't want to get involved. You monitor prices, you switch me, you monitor outages and things like that. So to me, the back to basics again is how do we respond to that? Because just automating yesterday's way of working is going to do nothing. That is a fundamental, what is our reason for being and our customer value proposition? How will we compete in this new world?
But I do think, so with that point, what matters even more than is brand, right? So if I have a brand I love and it's my go-to, I don't necessarily need to say, find me something for that, right? So if, my choice is, I always go to Harry Potter World, that's where I'm going because I love it. I don't need to sit around saying, where should I go on my vacation if I want to see something amazing, right? It's the difference between, do your customers know you, choose you? So that's your core. And then for everyone that is new, how do you make sure they know you and they choose you without having to rely so much on agent discoverability, which is, to your point, will be challenging for companies that don't have that brand, that don't have that recognition. And I actually believe, as a marketer, I deeply believe, whether I'm a telco company or an energy company, if they have a good brand and a good story, something that appeals to me, I might be like, okay, I'll go with.
But do you think that's true? Do you think the younger generations will go, I'll go with this energy company because I like the brand? Or are they just going wherever it's
okay, so here's a good example. My daughter's 19 or 20 now. She lives in Chicago. She's there for the summer. She got her first apartment, and her go-to she didn't do that. She's like, at home, I remember this brand. This was the one we used for cable or for Wi-Fi, right? And it was like, oh, interesting. So she didn't, it was like, I'm just going to call them because I know them from for all the years I lived with mom and dad. So you think, they would search. She wouldn't search. That's a waste of her time if she has a go-to, right? At her age, again, 20 years old, does she sit around thinking, I'm going to ask a bunch of agents? I'm like, no. She's like, I remember that. Seemed fine. Seemed good. I loved it. Mom and dad trusted it. I'm there. I do think that as a brand, the more you can think about how do I make sure I'm top of mind without that second guessing, the better. I'm not saying it's a panacea, but I am saying it deeply matters, even with companies that feel like, we're going to be disintermediated. No, you don't have to be that way.
Rebecca, I'm sensing that you may feel that some of that may be breaking down for the next generation, that they will search, they will connect with value propositions that aren't just maybe what their parents use or what they may be used to. I think some will, obviously, many. But I just wondered, it felt that you were maybe seeing more of a breakdown in the way the sort of Gen Z are sort of thinking about how do I choose what to do.
Some of the research we've seen shows that there's less brand loyalty with younger generations, and they're much more happy to swap. So, they will go with something that is, this was just cheaper. So that's why I've gone. I'm not particularly brand loyal, where previous generations had a lot more brand loyalty of, I know this is a good brand, or I know this is a quality brand. Younger generations, we're seeing through the research, see much more, it's much more fragile. The relationship with those consumers is much more fragile. And if you think about it, everything's gone much faster for these consumers. So they're getting all this information all the time. They're getting lots more. There's lots more to choose choose from. There's nothing feels quite as tangible as some of us older people when we had less choice and there was less stuff being thrown in our faces. So I do think it is harder to keep and retain those younger consumers, because I just think they have so many more opportunities, and they're kind of going to your value proposition point. Well, why should I stick with you? So I'm with you now, but why on earth should I stick with you?
I think you're obviously, Rachel, a much better parent than I am. I'm actually I'm a contraindicator to my children. If I do something, they will do whatever the opposite is. Karen, can I ask you? I ask you about this? Lawrence, you touched on it, that actually through the experimentation phase, we are just layering on more and more complexity and more endless optionality. Here are 350 things you could now do, rather than, you know, when I started in the media, basically you had this print product called a newspaper and you sold it in a shop in the morning. That was kind of it. Now, you didn't have great audience relations because you didn't know anything about your audience. So, of course, it's much, much better where we are now. But, Karen, how do you help clients not just increase complexity and just add on more and more work?
Yeah, I mean, could be your product, your customer experience, but so when we're trying to get through the complexity of this, the very first thing I look at is with clients is what is the role? What are the 2 or 3 things that brand or marketing or customer experience does to drive the value of your business? Do you have enough evidence and clarity about what they are? Like, forget all of the noise, but what are the basic things that you do? And if you walk into a really well-organized business, they know that intrinsically, and it's in the ether, and the CEO knows it, the CMO knows it. It's not a conversation every time there's a new marketing budget kind of cost. It's getting sure that clarity of corporate strategy of what brand and marketing and customer experience do to grow the value of your business and keep it resilient, make sure it is the risk and controls are there. And one of the first things I look at in any business now is the risk and controls ledger. What do they put in to protect the value of the marketing and customer experience and brand asset? And I think AI now is a huge moment to kind of reinvent that and actually look more holistically as it is a really governing, organizing system, but you can't do it without knowing the 2 or 3 things that you're trying to make the business do and the evidence case for it as well.
We're just about at time. 1 or 2, I always say 1 sentence, that's obviously ridiculous. I'll say 1 or 2 sentences each, just to leave a brilliant audience here and the work that we're doing at Fortune around the whole community of marketing and how it needs to think about the future. Just give us 1 takeaway that you would like our audiences to think about as they're on their way to either their next event at Cannes or, frankly, going back to their offices and saying, the one thing I got from Cannes was that wonderful panel at Fortune, those 4 amazing people that gave me such an insight. It was almost Shakespearean in its poetry. Almost Messi-like in its skill level. And I just remember it from those
like that's
4
incredibly high bar.
These 4 people really broadly changed my life. So, Rebecca, I'm going to start with you. Yeah, just 2 sentences. That's it. In 2 sentences. Just a one takeaway. I joke.
I think despite what your previous friend said from the last panel, I think brands do need to be authentic and relatable if they want to survive in this very changing ecosystem.
Lawrence.
I think there is now no barrier to creating an abundance of mediocre but acceptable content. And the danger is that drives apathy, which is a slow and gradual decline of the most important asset that a company has, which is its customers.
Rachel.
That brand matters. You know, whether you're talking about B2C or B2B, brand matters deeply, and your brand visibility and your brand promise and your brand voice, all of it matters. And it matters even more now with AI.
Karen.
That brand, marketing, customer experience, they are financial assets. They're an important part of the intangible value of a business, and get closer to your CFO and take ownership of managing those.
Thank you so much. A very non-mediocre panel. I think you would agree. We're going to have a short break and then back for the next session. We're going to be talking about racing Frankfurters this afternoon, so do come back for that. But thank you so much to a brilliant